Professor Nicholas Grossman, International Relations at the University of Illinois and author of Drones and Terrorism. We're going to talk about the Gaza ceasefire. Will it hold, and how does this ever end? I don't mean the entire conflict, because that's only been going on since the Old Testament. But, Professor, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Where is this going?
Oh, that one's hard to say. At the moment, it is in an uneasy truce, a sort of uneasy pause. That is allowing for hostage exchanges of prisoners that various people, Israel had Palestinians in Israeli jails, and various hostages that Hamas had captured. And it's all focused on women and minors, that are children, teenagers. And the Israelis say that their goal still is to destroy Hamas, and that once this pause is over, that they're going to resume military operations. And the United States seems at least partially on board with that, telling them that it's okay, that, and agrees with the general goal of destroying Hamas, but they have to be more precise about it. So I think the best bet at the moment is a few more days of truce and pause, hostage exchanges, more humanitarian relief getting into Gaza, and then a resumption of fighting, though perhaps not as intense as the first part of it. That's my best guess, but I'm not totally sure.
So the civilized world says, and it's hard to argue with either point here, the civilized world says if this is Israel's 9/11, and it certainly appears that it was, they are fully entitled to respond and attack and put an end to the people who did this. But, and this is also completely legitimate, women and children and innocents dying at the numbers they're dying can't continue. How does A equal B, or does it ever?
Mm-hmm. It can't really. That's what makes this situation so terrible, and what makes the choices involved with it so difficult, so impossible, is that because Hamas launched this attack against Israel, and because, there's also the ongoing, all the years of the conflict and the backdrop and the violence back and forth, and, very few hands are clean involved with that. But you've got that whole backdrop. But from the attack from Hamas, and Israel gets this, of course, right to respond. And it makes a lot of sense that they would say we cannot possibly allow a security threat like this to continue to just operate next to us, in this territory, right, operate with impunity. And yet Hamas, because they know that they're fighting somebody much bigger than them with better technology and better weapons, they embed themselves among the civilian population. They go under urban areas. They operate out of places like hospitals and schools. And that means that they put a lot of civilians in harm's way. And so the choice then for Israel becomes either let Hamas continue to be a threat or try to go through the human shields to try to get them. And there's pretty much no way around that. It's one or the other. Either let them continue to operate and be in charge of Gaza, and be in charge of Gaza after this, which would have meant an immense amount of death and suffering, only to end up with a political situation kind of like where it started, or to go and try to remove them, end up probably killing thousands more civilians in the process, that people who were innocent, who probably a lot of them don't even support Hamas, don't even want them around, and have to kill a bunch of them in the process. And then the additional questions of, well, if once Hamas is gone as an organization, it's still kind of an idea. This idea of violent resistance will still be there. So then who's going to govern Gaza afterwards, and how to make that work? And that's sort of the next problem. And already some efforts being put into that, but it is also an incredibly difficult problem that no one really knows how to solve.
I don't know what the counterintelligence operation is like, but there's an individual known as the Guest who is believed to go from house to house to house, night after night after night, because of the constant threats on this individual's life, who is the strategic planner behind the horror of what happened to these innocent Israelis and various other terrorist acts that have gone on. So if there is any sort of counterintelligence operation, and you referenced it in your response to the last question, people who don't want this to continue, would there be what amounts to a TV version of a double agent who's trying to get information to Israel on where the Guest might be, or other Hamas leadership might be?
Partially. I think it's good that you mentioned the TV, say version of that. At some way, I think of this almost like that the plan for war is send in Batman. So because we know that Batman's going to beat up all the bad guys and not kill anybody and rescue the good guys, and it's going to go great. And, that's not how the real world works. So I think it's possible that Israeli commandos could find a way to hunt down one guy. They can't find a way to dislodge Hamas from control of Gaza. They can't find their way to where various hostages are. And they can't find their way to all the Hamas leaders or fighters, especially because a lot of the Hamas leaders and fighters are hiding in tunnels right now, which are booby-trapped and secured in various ways. And the only way the Israelis can possibly get them is with heavier military operations. There's no real way to do this in a clean kind of Hollywood comic book sort of way. It's terrible, but it's
it's factual.
Yeah.
The propaganda is run so deep for so long, and for some people it's not propaganda, it's their facts. Is there such a lack of trust in what life will be like after if Israelis are to run Gaza from a security standpoint that Gazans wouldn't turn anybody in? In other words, even though they know what Hamas did led to this, they see some justification in it, even though they might not be a part of any war effort?
So that part's pretty hard. That the people who, when somebody blows up your house, you tend to blame the people who dropped the bomb, even if you know that there was somebody else who kind of prompted that as a reaction. It makes, of course, you're angry. Like, these people killed my kid. Like, that's not a thing that you then say, oh, but it was okay because it's somebody else's fault. Mm-hmm. So some of that will never go away. But there's something that also comes out of studies of terrorism and insurgency of the some of the public has, I think, a misnomer of the idea that if you try to kill terrorists and you kill some innocents in the process, you create more terrorists in the process. And that is partially true in that you might boost recruitment, but that is a longer-term process. There is a time lag between those, and the people who might get recruited are not nearly as skilled. They're not leaders. They're not bomb makers. They don't have military experience. And there's a period of time between when a terrorist group is severely weakened and when they can reconstitute themselves, in which there is potential for giving people reason for hope, giving people a better life. So there is currently a decent amount of planning, probably not as much as there should be, but among some Middle Eastern states, I think Egypt is involved with this, Qatar, some of the other Gulf states, the United States, and talking about what potentially could happen with Gaza afterwards, because if Israel can remove Hamas, which is already sort of an if, then if a lot of the world can rush in with things like humanitarian aid, with trying to move towards things like a Palestinian state as the ambitious goal, but more Palestinian independence, greater economic control, greater security control, just with somebody other than Hamas, then there is a potential that Gazans see hope starting, a glimmer of hope after all of this darkness, and then maybe want to work towards peace and reject Hamas. On the other hand, if it ends up with something like an Israeli military occupation, or even as some of the Israeli government is talking about, starting where they're going to take some of the territory, put some settlements on it, if they start doing things like that, then the cycle will just continue and go worse, and the Palestinians in Gaza will look at it, even the ones who didn't like Hamas, as, well, maybe I guess they had a point. And so that is the thing to avoid. But that's going to be hard, given that there are at least some people involved, including the Israeli government, who don't want that.
And part of the numbing nature of this is not only is there no way to predict the future, there's really no way to predict the day, going forward. But listen, you educate us every time that you're on. We're not paying tuition for this. We feel only mildly guilty. But we thank you, and we are envious of the students that take your classes and have a chance to experience it with you. You're terrific, so I appreciate you being on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, there you go. That's the great Nicholas Grossman, our favorite professor.
He's the best.
Yeah. I failed again.
No, you did good. You had smart questions. We all used our words. It was very good.
I think the comments he just wrote me back in real time. It just happened just a second ago was that I failed.
Oh,
yeah.
Big fat F.
He said you were just asking me a long question so you wouldn't have to do the work. He's not wrong.